Hi everyone, it's Jerry. I have an excellent game to share with you from round 5 of the 2025 Freestyle Chess Grand Slam Tour. This was played on February 7th. On the white end, Magnus Carlsen playing against Javokhir Sindarov. All right, time controls 10 minutes with a 10-second increment. This is position number 836. Now, very easy to be intimidated with this variant, all these different starting arrangements with the pieces. The same basic solid principles are applying throughout in this game. Now, one of the first scans I do with this variant, I look at all the pawns, and are any of them unprotected? In this arrangement, no. So the same story here for all the black pawns. And this is an important first step, really, because if there was, let's say, one unprotected pawn, let's say these pawns were unprotected, there might be a good start with a knight move, going in for a quick smothered mate. That could be irritating in some situations. Clearly not the case here for either side. Also, there's no pawn moves that are freeing the bishops in a way where they reach out and target a pawn. This pawn is under fire, no problem. Where do we begin with this one? Well, Carlsen kicks off with f3. So we're trying to, with each move, extract more than one positive. So what is a positive or two behind f3? Well, clearly the queen has some air. And I believe bigger picture, Carlsen has his sights set on building in the center. This pawn will help support an e4 advance. Black's replies with f5. There, you went 1. I'm going to go 2 and claim maybe I've squeezed just a little bit more out of my f-pawn. Carlsen continues here with d4. If we play with e4, we're looking more at a balanced game structurally. It remains imbalanced here. It's d4 in this game. d6, so both baby pawn moves maybe have the same idea in mind, supporting a pawn duo. From here, the only squares for these knights, both are developed on healthy squares, both tucked behind a pawn. Knight g3, knight g6, and from here we have a4. Is there going to be a space grab that would maybe give white an inch? Black says, no, you don't. An additional point behind these pawn advances, the bishops are helped. They finally have an option. Now from here, Carlsen plays with e4. Computer doesn't really think that that's a good idea, which really brings into question the initial idea, f3. We're going to see that Carlsen ends up with this ideal pawn center, 2 pawns in the center on the 4th rank, but it's a bit tricky to maintain it. It sort of ends up being target practice for black, and it's not easily maintained. With regular chess, it's almost always a good idea to have those 2 pawns in the center. The knights in regular chess start out on g1 and b1, and they fall on these very healthy squares, and from those posts, they control those points. Not the same situation here. This knight in particular sticks out. Yes, it's on a healthy square, considering these 16, but it doesn't help in any way support that white center. All right, in the game, it is e4. What the computer is looking at is this idea to develop the bishop and go for some light square bishop exchange, and even look forward to a queen exchange. Has its eye on some end game or queenless middle game, whatever you want to call it. Calls it around even here. All right, we don't go in that direction. We do not see bishop a2. It's this play in the center. Get the capture, recapture, and from here, bishop a7 is played, immediately throwing this pawn in a pin, and you can't get out of it right away, at least. Another move here for black is bishop g4 check, and I'd really be curious to know what Carlsen really had up his sleeve in response to this. I mean, was he really prepared to go uncastled in this game? It says King e1 is the best. You really don't have too many other options. I guess he was prepared to play king to e1 because blocking with the knight is going to hang this e4 pawn. That would have been interesting. At the end of the day, black does not go for this check. He focuses here on the d4 pawn. And next up, Carlsen here plays h3, cuts out the bishop check as well as a knight jump. Notice if bishop e3 here defending the pawn and unpinning the pawn, knight g4 would be irritating. So h3 in this one, and here we go. Opponent's in a pin. What do? Put pressure on that pin. Bishop e3. This pin is now resolved, and in the end, this queen now takes up a nice central post, and it is black who is in fact in some pin. d6 pawn pinned. All right, need a complete development. Bishop e6. And from here, kingside castles. Another option here for white, I came across a really interesting line. It's looking at this as an option as well, taking advantage of the pin. And I'm going to play out several moves here. I want to bring it to this one interesting point. There's a really cool move, a couple cool moves. This one right here is pretty neat. Another way to take advantage of the pin. Bishop is hit, b7 is hit. It says in this situation, best move, very flashy. It says best here is to take on h3. Now, what in the world is going on with that? Well, from here, it's looking at this capture. b7 is one of the top moves, but here's the line I wanted to highlight. What in the world is happening if the bishop is captured? Check this out. There would be a queen check targeting the knight. Let's say it's saved. And now, who's not going to like playing this move? Queenside castles, and black is pretty much winning now. Down a piece, but winning. King, still stuck in the center. And this pressure here, this fork, this pawn, I should say, is no longer in a pin, so the d-file is now going to open up. There's no way to avoid this. White takes, you take with the rook, and thanks for the queen. And if the knight moves out of the way, I mean, what else to even try? The file opens up, and next up, we hammer away at the pinned knight. Anyhow, I just found that this move in particular, queenside castles here, was very pretty with this particular arrangement with the fork. Out of the pin, landing a fork and a possible pin right around the corner. Something really pretty about that. Anyhow, we do not see Carlsen try and take advantage of this pinned pawn. It's the simple castles from here. Now, looking at the structure, what do we have? This pawn is isolated. So let's blockade it. Knight maneuver to this e5 square. Knight f5. And where do we go from here? Well, you certainly don't want to take this knight. There is a threat right now on g7, so we got to do something about that. If you take this knight, that's going to spell big trouble here for Team Black. The light squares are going to be pounced on. Let's see how that would look. This is one way. Bishop a2, coordinating with the pawn. And another is knight f4 into e6. That will be a disaster for black. So you cannot afford to give up your light square bishop for this knight. The question here is which knight to drop into e5. One of white's pieces is telling you which knight should go there. This knight is telling you. We don't want to take this knight, and we certainly don't want to have to continually work around this knight. Therefore, it should be the G knight that moves so that we can next kick this knight out of our house. Knight f4 from here. My initial reaction to this was to back off, just instinctually, this idea to offset the bishop. But why not, in this case, move forward? That's what we see in this game. Bishop c4. Why not? With tempo. The forward moves are all under control well enough. Black is giving direction to white. Rook f2. In comes g6. Get out of my house. And now g5. Where does the knight go? Well, in this game it drops into d5. Computer says best is the following: to capture the bishop, but I do not think you're going to see many humans play in this way for the following reason. This file opens up. The dark square grip is fantastic. This knight is also drifting away from these support points by the pawn. This would really not be a way to play. Just not appealing at all. This dark square control black has is fantastic. So white plays in a different way. He drops the knight here into d5. We get the rooks off. Why not? This is a demotion of the king, I would say. It's moving forward, but it is now more vulnerable. Different situation if the queens are off the board. And, we need the king as a contributor in the center, but it's just exposed right here. So it'll eventually have to run away scared here to g1. Follow up, bishop takes knight. And from here, we see pawn captures bishop. If we look at the other two options, computer's leaning towards queen recapture. And from here, it's saying you could go ahead and land a check and even go with queenside castles. Says taking the pawn turns out to not be a great idea. If you instead take with the knight here, g4 would be excellent. And the flimsy shelter that white has is being broken down. Maybe a capture, maybe a push. That would be a very invasive pawn. Not a good idea to allow this break. So we might say, with the move in the game, e takes d5, white has an eye in preventing g4. The knight sticks around there. The queen's eyes have also opened up to this point. From here, knight c5, very healthy. These knights are fantastic. It says you could already queenside castles here without fear of queen a7, because there's going to be a check, a follow-up battery, and who cares if there's a check here, the knight goes here, and the queen would be completely out of play. Black would be attacking with a queen, a rook, and a knight, and no, there is no development over here. So, no queenside castles. You could, but knight c5, minimal calculation. You don't even have to worry about any queen a7 idea. The knight cuts off the queen. Fantastic dark square control. From here we see a rook lift, and a perfect response to this. I really like this next move. Not queenside castles. If you go with queenside castles, is this an idea? c3, and then b4, influencing this knight. You can't influence this one with any white pawns, but this is still a possibility. Black's move in the game says, I know this might be your idea. Queen g6, taking advantage of a weakness of white's last move. The bishop is unprotected. Play c3, it's down for the count. A perfect move, top move, queen g6. Carlsen's reply defends the bishop. Computer's pointing out best is to run away to g1. All right, very difficult position, however you look at it here for Team White. It's queen d1 in this game. The queen now slithers in, looking at that f4 square. Follow-up from here is c4 to challenge the queen. Now, if white plays in a different way, going just a single step, both pawn moves, free the bishop. The difference By going one step, maybe with the eye on still potentially flushing this knight away, this would cut off the rook from its defense of the knight. So black would be able to reply to c3, in other words, with queen f4 check, and you couldn't run away. The king would have to stay glued to defending the knight. So in this game, in response to queen e4, it is c4. Queen f4 check. You could forget about challenging the knight now with the pawn on c4. After king g1, we have queenside castles. That's move 23. Let's just pause for a moment. Every one of black's pieces is better than white's. Piece comparison, queens, 5th rank queen, 1st rank queen, minor pieces. The white minors cannot compete with these 4th rank stable knights. The rooks, well, this rook is just a moment away from being on a fantastic square, occupying one of the two completely open files. This rook here patrolling a rank, not very influential, not very helpful here for white. Doesn't have many options anyhow. The knight's on dark, controlling these light squares. Only has one option here on c3. Not the most brilliant square for that rook. And finally, maybe most importantly, the king positions. This king, the white king, is not having a fun time. Very flimsy possibilities for g4 to break down the position. White has the much more vulnerable king. This is a perfect shelter for black. Maybe even in some situations where there isn't a queen on board, the queens have been exchanged, we could see some entry like this along the dark squares. Black clearly in the driver's seat here. Completely under control. Follow up, bishop takes pawn. You might as well have a pawn for your troubles. There's no saving this. Black could afford these slow, improving moves. All the positives remain here for black. Now, follow up, rook c3. We activate the rook. And from here, bishop c2 is played. If something else, for instance, king h1, that's what the computer has its eye on. Black has a good response with g4. And now what do? If you take with the pawn, the bishop's going to be in trouble. And if you take with the knight, we exchange knights. You can't take with the piece. You'll get mated. And after the pawn captures, rook here, in this case, not the best, because rook h3 would be available with those knights exchanged. But what you can play here, no just one winning path or anything for black. Queen f2 is looking good. Or if you really want to swipe a pawn, you could do that as well. Can't take because of the mate. So, however you slice it, white is in trouble here. After the rook is on the e-file, the bishop falls back, and now we have this discovered attack against the knight. And what do? The knight now has no defense. Attacked twice, defended 0, and if it moves, let's say to g4, you're going to lose the queen. So it is bishop takes knight, queen takes knight check, another check, and the queen sneaks into f2, ready to win the queen next. Carlsen has to hit the reverse button, and now we have the g4 break. White is up a pawn after g4. Well, is still up a pawn here, but completely broken down, completely on his back foot here. Queen can't go too far, has a responsibility. This one very close to over. He knows his king is in big trouble. Let's get the queens off. Well, knight takes bishop follows. If you want to get the queens off, I'm going to be up a knight. Got to recapture the piece. G takes h. And from here, it's queen takes h. If you take with the pawn, rook e2. And the only way to stop these two checkmate in ones is to give up the queen for the rook. Obviously, winning there for black. So the try here is with queen captures pawn and pop quiz. Can you spot black's last move. Feel free to pause the video. Okay, final move here, queen d4, and Carlsen resigns. This is a perfect way to follow. No capture of the pawn. The idea, keep control over g1 and pave the way for rook h8. And black will soon be winning the queen. A very nice finishing touch to this game. Anyhow, what are your thoughts on this one? Feel free as usual to leave any feedback to this video in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care.